son of Draka and Durotan, gladiator, shaman, war chief, lord of the clans. How do we even begin? Back in the late 90s, Blizzard was working on Warcraft Adventures, a 2D adventure game in the style of the old point-and-click adventure games of the early 90s. But I think that at some point they realized that the trajectory of games were moving away from that. And they found themselves with a story that wasn't going to be told then. And I think they had planned that this story about Thrall needed to be told before Warcraft 3 in order to contextualize a very new take. You know, what is life for the Horde after Warcraft 1 and 2? How has it changed? How has time advanced in Azeroth? And a lot of that was going to be told through the experiences of Thrall, a child of orcs who grew up in Azeroth having never known his parents or really his people, and raised by humans, right? And Christy, you were there right when it first began.
I wrote Lord of the Clans, which was the story of that game. I did it in 6 weeks. By the end of it, I was in love with Thrall, I was in love with Azeroth, in love with Blizzard, and you know, now here I am, and Thrall's still going strong, and so am I, so it's pretty awesome. And
a lot of these details, you know, when we dig into the deep lore, someone has to keep track of all of them. And we actually have a department for that, don't we, Sean?
The origins of the lore team was because Chris Metzen, who was our friend and someone we know and love very dearly, he had the foresight to say, I'm creating so many worlds and it's falling out. I need somebody to please run around and catch this stuff and put it somewhere so when we need to refer back to it, we can, because I don't trust my own brain. There's too much cool stuff flying out. So at that point, we were now set up as a company to really cultivate and grow our franchises.
One of the great things about this was that Chris was willing to understand that there's a difference between what makes a game interesting and what makes a book interesting. So we kept all the things that we thought were the really juicy and fun, exciting bits. And when I learned that we were making that shift that you talked about from orcs versus humans, you know, to
a more complex expression.
Much more complex, to working with a human, Jaina Proudmoore. I was like, well, this guy needs to have some idea that humans aren't awful. We need a compelling human for him to say, I see, I can't, you know.
In contradiction to his human captors at the time.
Exactly, because he was not being very well treated. So I got to introduce a character named Taretha Foxton. It was a chance to interject something a little different from the much more drums and fighting and battle and clashing of swords. There was like a, dare I say, a human element, but we all know what I mean by that, of kindness and self-sacrifice and connections that shouldn't be able to be formed but are, because everybody is willing to go the extra mile.
Yeah, there was a whole scene in Lord of the Clans where Taretha actually hugs Thrall, and that is the very first time he was ever given affection in that regard. He didn't know what to do with it. And even if you think about Thrall's whole station at that point in his life, the orcs of Azeroth were being rounded up and put into internment camps. And yet Thrall was a slave. So that, in the very beginning, set him apart from any other of the orcs of that time. Especially, again, and I go back to the book, there is a scene where Thrall is standing surrounded by guards, and an orc breaks off from one of the metal cages, seeing Thrall, thinking he's going to be hurt, and this orc gets brutally murdered, trying to protect Thrall, and Thrall's just standing there going, I don't know what's going on.
What's happening.
No, he didn't know the language.
He ever saw an orc. He was raised in an entirely different circumstance than any of his peers at that time, and I really think when he was freed, that kind of gave him the kind of like the perspective or the POV to go, okay, this person who is probably going to suffer really bad things, Taretha, is going to suffer by doing this act. Why? She hugged me. Why? I'm here to kill things. That's what I've meant to do. But that moment kind of set him on a path, and so I get goosebumps still thinking about it. Just that moment of kindness, and it changed everything.
You know, I just want to bring that up because literally within the last month, I had somebody tweet me and say, you know, one of my favorite scenes, and it just always makes me choke up, is this orc giving his life to protect what he views as a youngling in captors. So it's interesting to see how these things that we don't necessarily think are the most important things keep resonating.
Thrall was thrust into a world in which terrible wars had been going on that he had no part of, he had no memory of, but the aftermath was all around him. And as he came into his own as an adolescent and was learning the legacy of his birthright and his parents and the Frostwolf clan that were his forebears, he started to see the scars within the orcs that had lived through those terrible times, like Gromosh Hellscream, and had to learn more about what were my parents like? What was those times like? And he started to develop a bond and almost a reverence for, I need to figure out what I am, who I am, what it means to be Orcish. And he did his best to try to learn from Gromosh, and they ended up becoming wonderful friends.
The journey he takes, just like not knowing who he was to learning who he was, and even then, he had to prove it.
Well, and it's the whole nature versus nurture thing, right? So he can't separate one out and say, I am this or I am the other. He is unmistakably an orc, and yet in the orc society, he obviously comes with something else that they're not familiar with.
Thrall did something none of his people beforehand did. He abolished the clans. He was like, I don't want there to be petty infighting. I want this horde to succeed and be different from everything it was before.
He was really, in a way, forming the new family, not just the new horde, but his new family with people that he trusted, with Vol'jin, with Cairn, people who were not orcs, but they were part of his family, this horde.
What he made, what he was trying to build, should last, because it is not just honorable, which Orcish legacy is, it is also done in tradition, of shamanic tradition, which I love also in Lord of the Clans. Thrall was the first shaman in an entire generation for the elements to choose. Thrall was that new start again. And we see that over and over. We can atone, we can redeem, things can be good. And he was I want to say the catalyst for it, but he was honestly, he was the main reason for a lot of the good that came about.
Yeah, and as we move into another chapter in this timeline, what would you say was the final statement of the Lord of the Clans, Christy? Like, where did it leave off Thrall looking to the future?
I think he had finally accepted his destiny, had finally understood that this part of him that had been initially imposed on him, but later he accepted it, of human, was a good thing. Gromosh Hellscream said, you are the sum of all of your experiences, and that has brought you where you are today.
And that brings us right to Warcraft 3, which, for today's discussion about Thrall, there's no talking about Thrall in Warcraft 3 without talking about Thrall and Jaina Proudmoore's intertwined fates.
Another echo of Taretha Foxen, if I may say so. Yeah.
And Jaina, like Thrall, was kind of a second generation over the old soldiers of the First and Second War, right? She was a child when her father was battling the orcs, and as Thrall was a baby, just growing up in the aftermath of these terrible wars of the past. And so both of them are like a second generation. And I think that fueled their ability to look past, the egregious conflicts of their people in the past and say, what are we going to do with this today? How are we going to move forward? And what did they accomplish together, Sean?
Honestly, when you think about Warcraft 3 and the situation that Thrall and Jaina were put in, so just to kind of set the stage, they were following this prophet that was going to every single leader of the Eastern Kingdom saying, you need to get out of here. Bad stuff is coming. We got to go. So when they went to Kalimdor, it was that very same prophet that was like, haha, I got you to where exactly here because of a certain reason. We need to save the world. There is that thing that you're running from is coming here, but only together with the Night Elves will you survive this as a people of Azeroth. Mm-hmm. So it was a large leap of faith for a human and an orc to work together in a strange land, by the way.
For Thrall, the finale of that storyline, when it came down to it, was trying to find a way for his people to truly be free of the blood curse that was foisted upon them. The blood curse of the orcs that had drank the blood of the Pit Lord Manoroth,
Grommash was the first, yeah.
and Grommash was the first who took the cup. And to see that storyline come full circle at the end of this campaign, as Grommash gives his life, right, to face down the one whose blood had enslaved their people all these years.
Source, yeah.
And in that cinematic, Grommash says, I freed myself. And Thrall says, no, you freed us all.
Especially, and I really wish the cinematic couldn't show it, but Grommash was like burnt to a crisp in Fellfire. Like if we had the tech then, I really would have been clearer, but that moment was just so heavy. He was holding him and just being almost so fragile. This mighty warrior that he had known just as a friend, like gave everything. And so I got goosebumps just now thinking about it again. But
I think Grommash's sacrifice in that moment left an indelible mark in Thrall's brain that even through a life that the orcs had to lead for better or worse, as terrible as being a member of the Horde at its worst times was, they had to find their way out. And Grommash made several mistakes even during the Warcraft 3 campaign. He subsisted and fell back into the blood haze that had driven them for so many years. But Thrall really believed that in the end, Grommash took, control of his choices, of his destiny, and made the right decision. And I think that would color his, Thrall's opinion about the Grommash family line at some point down the road.
Yeah. Important tale at this moment that laid the seeds for.
Yep. So, anything else we want to touch on in Warcraft 3 era before we move on to World of Warcraft?
I'll tell you a fun anecdote.
Yes.
After finishing Lord of the Clans, time passed, and I, like everybody else, saw the intro to Warcraft 3. And there's a scene, of course, where Thrall, bolts upright and opens his eyes, and Thrall's eyes are blue, which no other orc has had. Mm-hmm. And to see him sit upright and open his blue eyes, I started crying. And I was like, my baby! Because I'd never seen him move before. It was just some black and white illustrations. Mm-hmm. So to see that come to life right in front of my eyes, I think we've all seen so much great advancement in this field and some fabulous things. It's hard to remember just how impactful some of these older ones were because you'd not seen stuff like that before ever.
And I think that about brings us to World of Warcraft, the game released in 2004, which resumes our journey in Azeroth 4 years after the events of Warcraft 3. So there's been some time for things to shift or heal. And what was the status of the Orcish clans, Thrall's new horde, at the beginning of World of Warcraft?
So yeah, actually, once they realized, hey, the world is saved, what do we do now? Like you said, they were like, okay, we should start healing. Thrall, and to his credit, took the horde and founded an entirely new land. But he founded an entirely new land that really wasn't prime real estate. It was more of a, hey, look at this arid desert land that we can have. This is home. This is Durotar.
And why would they choose that area?
The reason they chose Durotar, when they could have chose other lush places on Kalimdor, is atonement. Thrall knows his legacy super well. He knows the orcs decimated their world. The world of Draenor that once was is Outland now in their continuity. So even though they did an amazing thing by saving the world, there was still this baggage that needed to be dealt with. There was a lot of history that needed to be atoned for.
Durotar, after his father Duratan. Orgrimmar, after Orgrim Doomhammer.
That was the former war chief of the Horde.
Former war chief of the Horde
that he
was
beat
now
in a single combat. Which was
in single combat.
Didn't know who he was, but yeah.
But all of this showed an interesting, juxtaposition between the fact that he wanted to create something new, and yet he seemed to idealize some elements of the Horde that came before him. Right? Like, what elements of the Horde do you think he admired and was trying to hold on to?
Growing up as he did, I think there's a wildness that he never got to taste, right? This passion, the drums, this primal ferocity that also was tempered with honor. and and here's the humans with their teacups, right? It's like it's totally different. And so I think that appealed to him, and I don't know that he ever really understood it because he hadn't been raised in it.
Even his dad, Durotan, wasn't a really well-known chieftain at the time. It wasn't until Thrall was like, my dad is awesome, he did this, he was exiled by the Horde, really brought the legacy of Durotan to the fore for the Horde. They're like, oh, let's learn more about this Durotan guy, seems pretty cool.
And one of Thrall's closest friends, the one who helped him find this place and set the foundation of Orgrimmar, was, of course, Cairn Bloodhoof, the chieftain of the Tauren. And when they found each other initially, when Thrall arrived in this foreign land, it was Cairn that showed him, what it was going to be like to survive in Durotan. What was their friendship like when they first met?
It was welcoming. It was, again, Cairn was older. So this is almost another father figure, probably. I'm seeing family keeping, just coming out of these discussions right here, right now, this theme of family and home that keeps coming up again and again and again.
And that was very much the Horde of what we sometimes call vanilla World of Warcraft. The first release was that the Horde was a group of people who had to bind together in order to find their place in the world, right? They had to lean on each other. And I think it was actually the partnership between the Tauren and the Orcs that allowed themselves to finally settle into a place and call it their own. Because they couldn't do it alone, right? They'd been but once they had each other's backs, they were able to put down roots and start building something for themselves. And that was awesome. And we all played that experience in World of Warcraft.
That's what I love as a tagline for the Horde is they're trying to survive in a world that's hostile to them. Like, that is amazing. They're all banding together and they're there because each one of them, like you said earlier, they have each other's backs.
Found families.
Found families.
Right? The families you build that you're not necessarily born into.
The next moment of consequence for Thrall, I would wager, is the first expansion. The Burning Crusade opened the gateway to Draenor, the shattered land of the remnants of the planet his parents got him off of before it exploded. And he got to walk through there with his own eyes and return to his ancestral homeland, having never seen it before, only the tales told by the other members who had been there. And when he returned and met people who knew his parents, who did he end up meeting there? Garrosh Hellscream, the son of Grommash, the heir of the bloodline legacy of one of his closest friends in the Warcraft 3 campaign. How did that go down, Sean?
Oh, man. I keep going back to the Burning Crusade specifically because that was one of the first games before I joined creative development. I was in quality assurance and I tested the heck out of that game. I love Burning Crusade for the moment that you're bringing up because it wasn't just meeting Garrosh. He first got to meet his grandmother. This was Thrall's first moment of meeting a blood relative. And the best part about that is he learned his name. For the very first time. He was always Thrall. He was told by Blackmore, yeah, I own you, your name is Thrall. And so even when Thrall learned how to write, he's like, I'm owned by somebody. It's hard, but he was like, no, your name isn't Thrall. This is what it was supposed to be. And just imagine that, walking in like, this is the destiny I've been hunting for so long. This is a missing piece that thank you, Grandma. But Grandma's like, yeah, but you should really talk to a person outside who you might know, his name's Garrosh Hellscream. He's been raised on the dishonor of what his father had done. To back up a little bit, where Thrall saw his grandmother was in an area called Garadar, which is another fun little lore fact is that was named after his grandfather. So he's literally coming to an area, like he named Durotar after his dad, he was coming to an area of family. Like you said, it's all tied together with family. But yes, Garrosh, when he met him, knew that his dad was the first to drink the cup and did awful things to the Horde. And Thrall saw them as like, but you don't know the good that he did. Yeah. Do you understand that the reason the curse is lifted is from the very man that you were feeling so down upon? I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Right.
But there's a wonderful piece of art that we also shipped between the two, just having a campfire talk and just the looks on expression in her eyes, like, I get to tell you the wondrous things that your father has done that you have no idea about.
Thrall, of course, did what anything would do, and he kind of took Garrosh under his wing. He stepped in as surrogate father with the opportunity to give Garrosh an opportunity to live up to what Thrall felt was the great legacy of Grommash. You know, the legacy he left is what mattered to Thrall, right? In the end, he did the right thing. And Garrosh, I'm going to fill in as that father figure, and we're going to figure this out together. And of course, he took him back to Azeroth and wanted him to participate in his new horde and be part of this so they could find each other again. And the timeline now begins to deviate toward Wrath of the Lich King. At the beginning of Wrath of the Lich King, a threat had opened up in the north. Both the Horde and Alliance were having to send forces to Northrend, and Thrall actually gives Garrosh a high command on this expedition, right? Says, you are going to lead this expedition. Oh man, Garrosh is all really excited, and he gets in there and he's being full orc, all right? But he's being effective, and he's leading the troops, and he's making results. And Thrall can't help but notice the way that the other orcs are responding, the way that he leads his people, the efficacy by which Garrosh just seems to be a born leader. And he starts to doubt himself. He actually starts getting into his own mind about, oh, is this because of my human upbringing? Is this because there's some part of me that doesn't actually represent, what the orcs are expecting me to do as a leader? And I think he got really in his head about that. Like, what do you think, Christy?
I agree. And also, he started pursuing the path of the shaman more.
Right. He was trying to find a center in the earth.
Trying to find center. And it's interesting because Garrosh is taking this, and he had that upbringing where he wasn't a real orc because he was sickly and his father was bad. So he's like, I'm not just going to be an orc. I'm going to be the orkiest of the orkiest orcs.
Orc prime.
The orkiest
time, all the time. The problem is that if that goes unchecked, a lot of bad things can happen. Imbalance is not a good thing.
At the very moment he's starting to doubt his, capabilities to lead as an orc, having been raised the way he was, the moment everything the Horde needed from Thrall started to slip away. And those two things started to diverge again.
Garrosh had reached that orc pride level of, everything is not as bad as it was. So the pendulum swung the other way. There were other orcs of the Horde at that time that saw that happening. And they also saw how the other orcs were responding to him. So there's a wonderful moment in Wrath of the Lich King I keep going back to, where there is Varrock Saurfang, Garrosh Hellscream, and a few others looking at a strategy table. And they're like, we just need to take it this way and do this way. The big point of that scene was Varrock goes, you honestly don't know your history. And he was talking about the screams of Draenei children, that orcs, this is your heritage. And then he lays the table all of the atrocities, and then Garrosh goes, well, what do you do now? And then Varrock goes, I don't eat pork. But he's just telling you, yes, being an orc is great and all that, but you have a history that you need to be aware of, because this is a path you are not going down, and if I see you going down this path, sir, I will lay you out myself. And that was the promise that he made him way back then. So it was the flagpole of where Thrall's advisors, Cairn and Varrock, going, you need to watch out.
He's not tempered yet. He's not able to handle it yet. He hasn't learned everything he needs yet. And this started to, as you say, Saurfang and Cairn were kind of like, And Thrall is like, no, but he really is the orc we need.
He was on the train.
Is this. So it started to become kind of driving a wedge between, Garrosh on the one side and Cairn's friends on the other.
Thrall had an almost blind optimism about Garrosh.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? He had a blind spot in as much as you are your father's child. I know that's inside of you. And yet we are all our own, right? Garrosh will be Garrosh. His father was his father. But that really made Thrall always kind of doubt himself, or always believe this will work out on its own. And that will inevitably come back to bite everyone.
And even Thrall told him, he's like, lean on your counsel. The Horde is not a one person, it is a group. And of course we saw how that played out, but he did his best to say, this is how it's supposed to be. You may not be there yet, but these people will help you get there.
And that about brings us to the Cataclysm. Probably the largest event that changed the world of Warcraft as we had known it, as has ever happened in this world. The Black Dragon aspect, Deathwing, emerged, cracking the planet all around and changing the familiar landscape of World of Warcraft. And because, of course, this was literally wounding the planet, right, cracking the earth, Thrall was a shaman. He was tuned to the elements of Azeroth. And so he felt that. And it definitely put him on even a harder mission. It was now on his shoulders to try to see what he could personally do to stem the damage that Deathwing had done.
Yeah, there was a scene where a fire just broke out uncontrollably in Orgrimmar.
Yep.
And Thrall is trying to calm the spirits, and he's trying to reach the spark and say, go down to the hearth fire, cease this thing. And it couldn't. It just couldn't. It says, I must burn, I must burn.
And then there's Drekthar giving all those visions, saying the seas will boil and the world will break.
And the world will break.
Yeah, so all of those symbols around.
And if I'm not mistaken, The Shattering, was the prequel novel that you wrote before Cataclysm.
Yeah.
And while there had been Warcraft novels, mostly they were like, hey, this needs to be told, this needs to be told. This was kind of a new, mid-expansion book.
Yes.
Its purpose was to say, hey, by the way, you all played Wrath of the Lich King, and Cataclysm's coming up. Give me the 411 on anything that happened between that period of time. So
Yes.
was.
This is where Thrall, feeling that he needed to know more about the elements than could be taught because things were so dire, he decided to return and to study the path of a shaman in the land of the orcs, to understand their elements, to hopefully bring it back. And it was never a sense of, he wasn't abandoning, he wasn't running away. He was going toward what he thought could be the answer to stopping it.
The world was breaking,
It
and
was-
he needed
yeah.
to go to a world that had been broken and talk to its
To
elements.
understand
Right.
what to do,
almost
how
a
to heal
development
it.
phase, right? Azeroth has just been hurt, and it can't even speak cogently with the elements because it's so in disarray that to speak to the elements of Draenor, a world that had that happen, even worse, but how are the elements dealing today? How did they stabilize? What is it going to take for the elements to speak softly to them once again?
Yeah.
Any more?
Oh, and we're also missing a wonderful character that he would meet in this class that he's taking in Nagrand, his soon-to-be life mate, Agra.
Yes.
And that interplay too, Christy. I loved how here's Thrall, War Chief of Horde. Everybody in Garadar is letting him know, oh, this is Thrall, this is, and she's like, who is they again? It's like, your name is Goel. I don't want
I'm
you
not
to
gonna
use
call
this
you Thrall.
Yeah, that's human. No, you are Goel. You are starting from zero, and I am your teacher. And that was a surprise too, because it was his grandmother, Thrall's grandmother. It's like, no, I could teach you and talk to you, but I think she's gonna have a more impact on you. She's like, what? So that whole kind of interaction between the two. He learned much, and of course we seeded a wonderful family moment there that would grow into more. But while Thrall needed to learn more, he left behind Garrosh in charge, and it wasn't that fully war chief at that time. It was kind of like a temporary thing. I'm off to study in Nagrand, you hold the fort, and everybody's telling him, don't do it, that's not a great idea. To the point where Cairn meets Thrall for a moment, and he's like, I'm going to beg you, don't do this. And it really, really, really hits home in these moments, because I had a similar moment in my personal life where you never know when it's going to be the last time you'll talk to somebody, especially your best friend. And when that exchange is heated, it really just hit home for me, because the last scene in the book, sorry, spoilers, the last scene in the book is Thrall standing on top of Cairn's pyre, trying to take the healing rune from his rune spear. But he was like, I really wish I could have told you. And a lot of the regret that he had, this friend that he had loved, ended their last conversation was in hateful speech, not hateful, angered speech. but he won't ever get a chance to erase that, especially all of the stuff that he had done beforehand. This moment, I don't want to say broke him or crushed him, but it hit him harder than anything. And that moment where he learned, I can't do this, that's when he officially took the Doomhammer plate of the War Chief and like gives it to Bane, saying, give this to my people, it is important. But I can't walk that path anymore.
During the story of Cataclysm, we arrived at patch 4.2, which was Rage of the Firelands. And this was the return of the Fire Lord, Ragnaros, once again coming back from what was 1.0, a return in 4.2.
Come back.
And I worked on the cinematic trailer. In this scene, it was wholly focused on Thrall trying to commune with the elements at the Maelstrom. And Aughra makes an appearance, so she's starting to become a bigger part of his life. And he's just in despair. The elements, I can't connect. And when he's left to meditate, immediately is an image of Ragnaros speaking to little shaman, or little shaman, as Chris would say. Both Ragnaros and Thrall had always been voiced by Chris Metzen. So this is one of several scenes where it was Metzen talking to Metzen.
It happened more than a few times.
Yeah, it's happened more than a few times. And this was him finally reaching through, but it wasn't the spirit he wanted to hear from. It was the angry fire spirits trying to burst through from the plane of fire at the moment of opportunity, given the weakness that had been created by the Cataclysm. And so by the end of that trailer, we saw very specifically in that final image, Aughra and Thrall standing together. Their bond is becoming closer, right? They're going to be together as they face the threats ahead. And it wasn't long before the Druids of the Flame abducted Thrall and actually banished him into the planes of the elements themselves, split him into 4 and sent him off saying, you're not going to mess with us anymore, you can't help Azeroth. And Aughra rose to the occasion. She said, not on my watch.
Yes.
And she grabbed the
Strong orc
player
women.
and strong.
I love them.
Oh yeah.
She grabbed the player and says, we're gonna get Thrall back. And you adventured side by side with Aughra, who to the player's perspective was still a newer character. They didn't know her very well. But through this adventure, they got to see the test of her mettle.
And then we got to see the wedding right afterwards.
Yep.
Right.
Oh man. I think that made a lot of, there was, the fan hope that Jaina and Thrall would get together, but she was there at the wedding kind of.
It was touch and go there for a while, but ultimately that chapter wrapped up with Thrall had a crisis of faith after the actions of, I don't understand the Horde anymore. I don't understand much of anything right now. I need time to find myself to recenter. And so he lays down the mantle of the War Chief and he leaves. In his absence, the orcs who had already been following, largely the lead of Garrosh, who was eager and willing and had the capability of rallying the Horde, fell in line very quickly. And he ascended to the War Chief of the Horde. But come end of Mists of Pandaria, the time to face Garrosh was afoot. And the heroes and champions of the Horde and the Alliance alike rose to face his insurrection at the gates of Orgrimmar and within. And as we know in World of Warcraft, the hero prevailed in the end, and Garrosh was felled within his machinations of this terrible horde he was trying to build. And who was the first person to step to Garrosh as he laid, defeated on the ground? It was Thrall. As he approached Garrosh, wielding the Doom Hammer, he laid upon him the statement, you are not worthy of your father's legacy. Again, Thrall admitting in this moment that all of the hope he had for Garrosh to be good, to be right, was born by Thrall's own high esteem that he gave to his father.
Yeah.
And he's just saying it plain. You had that, and yet you failed.
And there were hints of that way back even in the Old War one. You disappoint me,
You disappoint me, Garrosh.
So like that, again, that line that you said was kind of just like we've gone past disappointment. Mm-hmm. Like this was trial time. Like you have not just failed, you fall so short. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Once Garrosh was ultimately taken off to be imprisoned, the Horde turned to Thrall, right? You're here, you helped us, get it back. You're gonna lead, right? Thrall just wasn't ready yet. He's still in the place. Everything that he'd been through, his doubts were actually exaggerated I thought giving the horde up to Garrosh was a good idea. Why are you looking to me for further leadership? All right. Instead, he reflected very clearly right back onto Vol'jin. There's one person who saw the path and got us here, and it was you. You need to lead the horde. And so once again, he is guiding the horde to its ultimate destination, but he's just saying, I can't be leader. It's not in me. I don't have it. And that about brings us to the next expansion, Warlords of Draenor. Definitely one of the more interesting takes on an expansion I think we've expressed throughout the set that we've created. Once again, going back to Draenor, but not the Draenor we visited in Outland. Instead, this is Draenor as it was. This is the world as it was. This is the orcs as it was, with one exception. Garrosh Hellscream, having escaped justice, went back in time, bronze dragon magic. And what was the first thing he did? He stopped his father from drinking the blood. Everything we know about Warcraft history was based on Grommash Hellscream drinking the blood from that cup. What happens if he doesn't? Right? Yep. And it went in this entirely different trajectory. And so he began building the Iron Horde, right? Almost technology out of time for them to be able to be the ultimate force of conquering. You know, this is my destiny, you know? And the adventurers came here, and who was one of the very first heroes through the portal to face the Iron Horde? It was Thrall standing side by side with Maraud, the Draenei Vindicator of the Alliance. Side by side, smashing heads and ready to take on, whoa, okay, they've actually built a giant army.
Yeah. We need more men.
So after having to be a little bit on the run, they have different ideas of how they want to approach this, right? Maraud with the Alliance, we want to go find our people in Karabor. What does Thrall immediately want to do?
Oh my God.
I want to find the Frostwolves. And more specifically, I want to find the parents I've never met. Whew.
Especially he got to see the sites that he'd only heard about in tales. Like, it's crazy.
But it really wasn't his.
No.
This is another version. And so I don't think it was gratifying to him, but, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't quite the same as actually.
No, I think even in the narrative expression, Thrall understood this.
Yes,
right?
he did.
He tried to stay at arm's length and be like, I can get a glimmer of what my parents were and stood for, but I don't want to break their heart.
Yeah, he kept himself in secret.
He had to keep it a secret from them. It's when you're messing with time ways. And that just had to be heartbreaking because it's almost like looking at another apparition. It's something you can't truly have. It's something that's just out of your reach. You can see it, but you can't really touch it as if it still eludes him to this day, right? So that's hurtful.
Oh yeah.
Jumping forward a little bit, this is where he ended up facing off with Garrosh. And what a full circle this was, right? The cinematic, the Nagrand finale, I got to work on in 2014. And it was harrowing. To develop this cinematic was a trip through the feels. Because the full circle being that they fight this battle, this one more Mak Gora between Thrall and the orc who he had basically adopted as a surrogate son on the hill where they had met by Garadar. Where it started is where it ended.
And Stones of Prophecy.
And as the scene plays out, all the history comes to bear. Even though Garrosh had become this horrific villain, in his core he was still the same child or young adult that Thrall had first met on that hill. And that child had been wounded and felt abandoned and felt wronged and felt alone. You left me to pick up your pieces. That is an undeniable fact. That is what happened. Thrall said, I can't do this anymore, I don't understand it, and left the Horde in Garrosh's hands. And for it to have come out so viscerally, and I just have to give a shout out to Patrick Seitz, the voice actor of Garrosh.
Absolutely.
And when Andrea Toyas, our VO director, and I sat in the booth watching Patrick's performance through the window, when he delivered those lines and his voice is cracking, "You failed me." The shiver in our spine was so visceral. It felt like someone had actually really just died. We were almost in a traumatic experience level of just emotional turmoil. And we all had to take a moment to just, that was really heavy. But in the final burn down, when Thrall turns it on him and the elements now come to his command and Garrosh is getting his last dig in, "Thrall, you've made me what I am." And Thrall responds, "No, you chose your own destiny." I think in that moment he's looking back on Grommash and he's so disappointed. He's so disappointed that Grommash did terrible things his entire life. But in the end, he grabbed a hold and did the right thing.
Redemption.
And Garrosh had many, 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 many opportunities to do the right thing, to have proven his mettle, to have shown just one bit of, you are your father's son. And Thrall's greatest disappointment in that moment, I think, is that it never came true. And that's just tragic.
All of those best intentions, all of those steps in training and teaching and moments didn't lead to where he wanted. And thus
Garrosh Hellscream fell.
Yeah.
And Thrall at the end of that cinematic, the shot as composed, you imagine, especially in high fantasy, orc versus orc, big, huge, testosterone. You just think victory, right? You think victory, I won. No.
Nobody won that.
A sullen shot, defeated body language, picking up the hammer and walking away and never looking back.
And there was a moment in that fight, Garrosh throws Gorehowl, and it actually skids past, and he goes in with his fists.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that was the moment, because Thrall had given him Gorehowl. Mm-hmm. It was a beautiful moment, and he was like, "This was the weapon of your father. It's done great things. Mm-hmm. It's also done awful things. Mm-hmm. In your hands, it's up to you."
And he drops it.
And he just drops it.
This isn't my legacy, right? I'm not living up to my dad.
You guys are giving me goosebumps.
But yeah, just that skidding past and going in, it was just that moment. It was like that's for the failure right there. You can do everything right, and it can still go so awfully wrong. And I think that was the lesson that Thrall took from this, was I wanted to make the Horde stronger. I wanted to give them I wanted to give Garrosh and them every opportunity to thrive, and it was everything but.
After Garrosh fell, Thrall was still bearing the weight of the burden of how all of that went down, right? Probably reliving, wishing things had gone differently. And that carried forth into Legion, right? Where, while there's a grander thing going on, invasion of the Burning Legion, and we have to defend Azeroth, Thrall was right there with the rest of the heroes. Jaina and Varian, all, in Sylvanas Windrunner, laying siege at the Tomb of Sargeras to try to stop the Burning Legion. But even on that battlefield, when they were trying to hold back the initial assault, the elements were not responding, right? As we know, Sean, you don't command the elements, you ask the elements for their help.
Heed my call.
And then they either do or they don't, right? And they're not responding the way they should, right? And so Thrall got very, very grievously wounded. Right? I wouldn't say mortally wounded, but he got very badly hurt, as many people did. Many fell in the assault on the Broken Shore. Very few survived. And so coming back from that, he had to go away. He had to try to heal once more, like this time actually physically. Go to heal with the Earthen Ring in the Maelstrom, get back his center, especially since he feels like he doesn't have the connection to the elements.
Right. Something worse happened to Thrall while he was at the Maelstrom. Mm-hmm. He lost the Doomhammer. There was a moment where, like you said, he felt disconnected from the elements. What he did to Garrosh was irredeemable. That was, like you said, it was a burden that he held on to. So he felt the Doomhammer was dead weight in his hands. He felt that he was no longer worthy of it. He had fulfilled a legacy. He had made its prophecy come true. And now that's over. That is gone. That was taken from him. Physically, he lost it at the Maelstrom to the Burning Legion. There was a whole story about that before the player hero takes it up. But I keep thinking, him sitting back there going, the Doomhammer is yours now. how much that must have hurt to say the words.
And really, with all that had happened and all the terribleness, we really wouldn't see Thrall again until Battle for Azeroth. Horde and Alliance at each other's throats at a level that we had not seen since Warcraft 2. And these prominent figures now rising in the vacuum of power of souls we'd either lost or had moved on. Varrock Saurfang once more comes to the fore and is now this major force and realizes that, holy cow, I need to find Thrall. He goes to the fields of grain outside of Caradar and Oshugun and finds a homestead where Thrall is living with his life mate and his children and is asking, please, please. And did you write this cinematic?
I did. I got to write most of the
So you got to be the
pieces.
screenwriter on this cinematic.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it was really fun digress just briefly, bringing Saurfang back because you have living symbols of various incarnations of the Horde. And that's lovely, juicy stuff to get to work with. What I love is that Thrall is like, no.
For the third time now.
Yeah.
For the third time.
Yeah,
He asked
yeah.
3 times, no, no,
Yeah.
no.
And he comes back and he says, I've told you guys, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I will not lead the Horde. Saurfang goes, I didn't ask.
I didn't ask.
Which was very well received among our viewership. They really enjoyed that. But I thought you would at least fight for that.
And that had to cut him to his core.
Yep. And there's a moment we don't know what he's going to say, and then it turns out that Saurfang has been fully aware of what's going on. He's been followed by assassins.
There's eyes on him.
Sent by Sylvanas. And the two of them fight back to back like they've never been apart, and they're going at it, and they have each other's backs. And Thrall realizes there is nowhere he can go to escape this. He can't run anymore. He can't hide from it. He can't go back to the land and get his hands dirty in the soil. He has to face this. For him, we have the overarching backdrop of, yes, you've got to save the Horde, you've got to, help save the world, but also deeply personal. He's got to really, fish or cut bait. He's got to do this. And he made an X because some part of him knew that this day was going to come.
Yeah, totally.
Thrall will always be the child of the new age, right? He was born after the events of so many things that he will never truly understand. Whereas Varrock Saurfang is still a living example of someone who stood there at the first blood drinking of the Horde. He has seen everything, A to Z.
All of it.
And to have those two side by side. And Thrall, I believe, my opinion, my humble opinion, in this moment is still reconciling with the notion of it's all or nothing, right? Either I lead the Horde or I can't, right? I'm in or I'm out. And I think Saurfang in this cinematic finally challenged the notion, the Horde needs you. And it doesn't have to be more complex than that, right? There's no strings attached, there's no this or that about it. The Horde needs you. And it's the times where you keep backing off as far as just well, I can't be this. But you kept pulling the part of you that made the Horde function out of the equation.
That is so fascinating because that just flashback to what we were saying earlier. Thrall straddles two worlds. I can't be a human, but I'm not really an orc, And so he's doing it again. He is straddling, I am in the Horde, but I am not the leader. I can still be involved in helping to guide it and shape it without having all the responsibility of what goes right and what goes wrong. So we're right back to straddling two worlds.
Somehow, despite everything he had achieved in his life, still feeling like an outsider.
Yep.
He took Varrock's plea very seriously, and when he did, it wasn't too long before he found himself face to face with an old friend, Jaina Proudmoore. We talk about full circles in Warcraft all the time, but holy cow, right? These two had literally stood side by side, as the cinematic says, literally, that I directed and you wrote. We once stood side by side on the slopes of Mount Hygel, saving the world, and yet everything has gone utterly terribly since then. Where did we go wrong? What decision did we make? Why didn't we make the world be able to fix itself? The things that I think we all ask ourselves sometimes.
It just keeps going wrong. Every time we try, it keeps going wrong.
What goes wrong?
What's different
What's
this
different
time?
What's
this
different
time?
this time? And then when she says, we are, that hits, right? We are older, we have the wisdom, we aren't relegated to make the mistakes of the past. Perhaps there is a way we can find a better path forward. And it was just so touching. And I always geek out whenever I get the opportunity to work with these pillars of Warcraft 3 in the cinematic medium, especially two at the same time, especially ones that have such a rich legacy history.
I'm so glad we had the chance to do that. It was really very meaningful.
It was far, far, far too fun. But right after that about catches us up to today. Shadowlands, which has been out for a few months now. And, the question is, what's next for Thrall? I think that he has embarked upon the journey that many of our heroes did, having been abducted initially, but then having to resist the forces of the jailer and Sylvanas. And he's going to have a part to play as things move forward. Do you have any thoughts on that?
His mother has not been idle in death, and she has earned her place in Maldraxxus through her refusal to give up, for her courage in sacrificing herself for her child, for her loyalty. She is now in a position of jeopardy and power of some sort. Mm-hmm. The Shadowlands is a pretty big place, but it's also smaller than you think.
Yeah.
I think also especially, Thrall has a lot of knowledge to give. I think especially now as he's not war chief, he's a member of the council. I'm looking forward to the voices that will come to him and him having the breadth of all of these experiences to be like, sure, but this is why we shouldn't do that. To be a voice of reason and in a way to channel that cairn and Bane's on the council, don't get me wrong, but the heart of the Horde needs to be there. It was cairn before. Thrall said it himself in his funeral.
Yeah,
you were the heart of Horde.
Yep, the Tauren are the heart of the Horde. They really are. They're like the moral compass of the Horde.
Yeah.
I'm not biased or anything.
No, whatsoever.
And as a quick rewind contextualization of council, in the aftermath of the Blood War, Battle for Azeroth, Varrock Serafang sacrificed himself to depose Sylvanas Windrunner. And Thrall was there at the funeral, and Thrall was here once again, facing the same challenge that has come time and time again. How do we lead the Horde? Who leads the Horde? How is the best way to lead it? Do we look to examples of the past? Do we look to other examples? And this is now, the fourth time, He himself, while he was once the young, intrepid, lord of the clans, he is now one of the oldest, wizened leaders standing amidst them. And maybe now's the time to recognize that all of those who lent him to his experience, who informed his journey, who maybe aren't with us today, from Cairn to Varrock to all the souls that live within him as a member of this Horde, he can bring their wisdom. He can keep it alive. But that's not enough.
No.
Not alone. Bringing together all the other members of the Horde, Bane carrying on the legacy of his father, and bringing new members in from all the allied races that are now joining to make the Horde stronger, a stronger family, more members, more. We are stronger, and we will build, and we will become the Horde that we will always want to be. And I think in that day, it will not be Thrall's Horde. It will not be Blackhand's Horde. It will just be the Horde.
It will belong to all of them.
Yep. They will become their Horde. Or I like to say our Horde.
Our Horde.
I really get a lot of my geek batteries recharged just by not only hearing the tales that we have all shared these 14 plus odd years. Don't like to say it, but just I am very fortunate to be able to not only share the story time with you, but just to steal the creative energies that you guys share off with everybody in every meeting that we go to. So I honestly just wanted to say thank you for not only just this panel and this time that you're giving, but just thank you for your friendship. It's a little corny of me to say, but I am very thankful for getting a chance to be with you guys.
I have to say, this is amazing. I would never have thought when I was like, oh, should I take this book or not? I don't know.
All the way back.
You know, 20 years ago, people, I never thought I'd be, you know, still working through the books and then get a chance to come here and work at Blizzard proper. It is an honor to work with you gentlemen and to inhabit these characters with our minds and our hearts and to find their truths and to try to bring them to life via the written word or the filmed word or the brains behind them.
No, I would absolutely reciprocate and echo your sentiment as far as just feeling so fortunate and so lucky to be here with such esteemed colleagues. And also, I think all of us feel the fortune to work on such an amazing series of fiction, of fantasy, of imagination that is, you know, Warcraft. It is a world that our players live in, and they know it so well. It is a real place in our hearts. And the thing about real places is that you will know when something isn't right. And we always want to aspire to make sure that that never feels that way. And the only way to do that is to love it as much as we can and to try as hard as we do and to lean on each other.
Amen.
As we solve these things. So
Teamwork
thank
makes
you
the
all.
dream work.
Thank you so much for.
Let's do this again.
Let's do this
Yes,
again.
very much so.
All right. Awesome.